Before monastic life had rules, communities, or names, there was withdrawal. St. Paul of Thebes entered the desert not as a founder, but as a survivor. The Church remembers him as the first hermit because his solitude preceded tradition, structure, and recognition. His life reveals how the desert became a place of refuge before it became a vocation. Paul did not seek holiness through imitation. There was no model to follow. His withdrawal unfolded under persecution, when faith itself demanded secrecy. The Orthodox Church preserves his memory to show how fidelity often begins as endurance rather than intention. In honoring Paul, the Church points to a foundational truth. Ascetic life did not begin as idealism. It began as faith under pressure. The desert became shelter, and solitude became obedience to survival guided by trust in God. This documentary presents St. Paul of Thebes as the silent beginning of eremitic life. His story unfolds without spectacle, revealing how the desert first received a Christian, not as a monk, but as a believer seeking to remain faithful. Paul was born in Egypt during a time of instability for Christians. According to the Church's received account, persecution threatened life directly. Faith was not practiced openly. For Paul, withdrawal was not spiritual ambition. It was necessity shaped by fear, discernment, and trust in God's protection. As persecution intensified, Paul fled into the desert to preserve his life and faith. This movement was abrupt and irreversible. The desert offered no safety in human terms, yet it removed him from immediate danger, placing his survival entirely in God's hands. This flight marks a decisive moment. Paul did not know he would remain in the desert permanently. Orthodox tradition emphasizes this uncertainty. Solitude was not chosen as an ideal, but accepted as the only path remaining faithful without compromise. The desert received Paul as a fugitive, not as an ascetic. Yet over time, survival matured into vocation. What began as escape slowly became a life ordered by prayer, endurance, and dependence on divine providence. Paul's survival in the desert depended entirely on providence. Orthodox tradition records that he found shelter in a cave, a place offering minimal protection from heat and exposure. The desert did not provide comfort. It demanded adaptation. Paul learned to live with scarcity, receiving daily life as a gift rather than a right. Food came without planning. According to the received account, sustenance arrived in a simple and consistent manner, reinforcing dependence rather than self-sufficiency. The Church preserves this detail to emphasize that Paul's life was sustained not by skill, but by trust in God's care. Silence, at first imposed by isolation, slowly became chosen. Without community or liturgical structure, prayer unfolded simply. Paul did not practice ascetic techniques. His prayer matured through constancy, shaped by gratitude, vigilance, and awareness of God's nearness amid vulnerability. Time lost its usual measure. Days followed one another without external markers. This absence of rhythm did not lead to chaos. It formed attentiveness. The desert taught Paul to live in the present, receiving each day without anticipation or regret. Fear gradually loosened its grip. What began as flight transformed into stability. Paul's heart learned that safety does not arise from control, but from surrender. The Church remembers this transformation as the quiet birth of eremitic life. Through endurance, Paul ceased to be a fugitive. He became a dweller. The desert was no longer an emergency refuge. It became home. This transition marks the moment when survival gave way to vocation without ceremony or announcement. Paul's daily life unfolded without accumulation or foresight. According to the received tradition, He lived from what was given each day. This absence of storage was not romanticized. It formed vigilance. Each day required trust renewed, preventing illusion of self-sufficiency from taking root in the heart. Gratitude shaped Paul's prayer. When survival is uncertain, thanksgiving becomes immediate. Orthodox tradition preserves this simplicity to show how prayer arises naturally where dependence is acknowledged honestly. Paul's prayer did not expand through words, but through awareness of God's sustaining presence. The desert instructed without speech. Heat, cold, and solitude taught restraint. Paul did not impose hardship upon himself deliberately. Hardship arrived uninvited. The Church emphasizes this distinction to correct later misconceptions that asceticism begins with chosen severity rather than accepted reality. Providence also shaped humility. Paul had no audience and no comparison. Without recognition, pride found no nourishment. The desert removed both praise and blame, allowing the soul to remain exposed before God without defense or display. This life formed stability without structure. Paul's endurance reveals that discipline can emerge organically when life is ordered by necessity and trust. The Church preserves this memory to show that ascetic life precedes technique. It begins with fidelity lived day by day. Through this simplicity, Paul's solitude matured into communion with God. The desert did not isolate him from divine presence. It removed obstacles. What remained was prayer shaped by constancy rather than effort. After decades of solitude, Paul's hidden life was revealed through an encounter not sought by either man. According to the received tradition, St. Anthony the Great was guided to Paul's dwelling deep in the desert. This meeting did not arise from curiosity, but from divine prompting, preserving Paul's hiddenness until its appointed moment. The encounter unfolded without hierarchy or instruction. Two solitaries met as equals before God. Orthodox tradition emphasizes the simplicity of this meeting to show that spiritual recognition does not require formal authority. Communion emerged naturally, shaped by shared fidelity rather than comparison or admiration. Their conversation revealed no competition. Paul did not present himself as a model, nor did Anthony assert precedence. The Church preserves this detail to guard against later tendencies to rank holiness. The desert formed saints without rivalry, where truth was recognized quietly. This meeting served a single purpose: continuity. Paul's life, unknown to the Church, was now entrusted to memory. Anthony did not transform Paul's vocation. He received it. The encounter ensured that the eremitic life would not remain isolated from the Church's living tradition. The desert thus revealed its hidden lineage. What began as survival became example, and example became inheritance. Through this meeting, the Church received confirmation that solitary fidelity had preceded organized ascetic life without contradiction or rupture. After the encounter, Paul returned to silence. There was no expansion of influence or following. His vocation remained unchanged. The Church preserves this restraint to emphasize that revelation does not always alter calling. Sometimes it simply confirms it. Paul's life in the desert came to its end without announcement or ceremony. According to the received account, his death occurred as his life had unfolded quietly, without witness, known only to God. The Church preserves this simplicity to show that holiness does not require visibility to be complete. When Anthony returned and found Paul at rest, the moment was not treated as loss, but as fulfillment. Paul's long fidelity had reached its completion. The desert that sheltered him in life now bore witness to his departure without disturbance or drama. Orthodox tradition records that Anthony attended to Paul's burial with reverence. This act did not elevate Paul publicly. It entrusted his memory to the church. The desert relinquished its hidden inhabitant so that his witness could be received without distortion. Paul left no writings, no disciples, and no institutions. His legacy was not transmitted through instruction, but through example preserved in memory. The church emphasizes this absence to affirm that not every vocation produces visible fruit, yet all obedience bears meaning. His death confirmed the nature of his calling. Paul did not retreat temporarily. He gave his life entirely to hidden faithfulness. The church remembers this total offering as a complete response to persecution transformed into vocation. In this completion, Paul's solitude was revealed as service. His hidden prayer had not withdrawn from the church. It had sustained her silently, long before monastic life took recognizable form. The Orthodox Church calls Paul of Thebes the first hermit, not because he established a movement, but because his life revealed a path before it was named. His withdrawal preceded monastic rules, communities, and teachings. The desert received him as a believer before it became a school of ascetic life. Paul's witness clarifies a foundational truth. Ascetic life did not begin as a spiritual ideal. It emerged from faith under threat. What later generations would seek intentionally, Paul accepted under necessity. The Church preserves this origin to guard monasticism from abstraction and romanticism. His life also protects the Church from misunderstanding solitude. Paul did not pursue isolation as superiority. He endured it as obedience. His faithfulness shows that solitude bears fruit only when rooted in trust and perseverance rather than self-assertion. Through Paul, the Church sees how hidden prayer can shape history without visibility. No council recorded his name during his lifetime. No community formed around him. Yet his fidelity became the seed from which eremitic life would later grow consciously and communally. The meeting with Anthony ensured continuity without distortion. Paul's hidden life was not transformed into legend for spectacle. It was entrusted soberly to memory, allowing the Church to receive it as testimony rather than myth. St. Paul of Thebes remains a witness to faith that endures without recognition. His life teaches that obedience accepted quietly may precede institutions, movements, and traditions, yet remain essential to them all. If this documentary helped illuminate why St. Paul of Thebes is honored in the Orthodox Church, consider subscribing. Here, we explore the faith as it was first lived quietly, faithfully, and often unseen through saints whose hidden obedience shaped the Church before history recorded it.